So I found a cookbook at the thrift store back in 2019, and I decided to cook my way through it, mostly because my husband wanted me to and thought it would be a really cool idea to kind of do it like the Julia whole thing, and decided to put it on Instagram. And so ultimately the cookbook actually ended at Reagan, and so I just kept going. So that was just a lot of internet research and looking into other First Ladies cookbooks and different things like that, and so I just kept the project going. And then when the pandemic hit, the National First Ladies Library up in Canton, Ohio reached out, and so being that I'm in Tennessee, I started doing virtual content for them, and then that ultimately led into them wanting me to do these live programs, which I continue to do today. So in addition to the First Ladies, I also started doing some Cooking with the Suffragettes back in 2021, and then I found out about the Oak Ridge cookbook, Cooking Behind the Fence, and I became really interested in the Manhattan Project, and being not too far from Oak Ridge itself, I decided that would be a really fun project. So I got the cookbook and started cooking behind the fence myself, and started to learn these really fascinating stories of these women. And I think one of the things with the entire project, which a lot of people know about the First Ladies, of course, but they don't know a lot about them because you see their husband, you don't see what they do behind the scenes. And so a lot of times with women in history too, the suffragettes, some of the ones you've never heard of, some of these ladies in the Oak Ridge cookbook, you've probably never heard their name, but they had such like this big impact on history, and their stories are so interesting, and cooking their recipes is an interesting way to learn about them and their time period and the things that they contributed to society and our world that we live in today. I have a bachelor's in history, and I focus mostly on 1945 and the Holocaust, as well as the Roaring 20s. Those were my main focuses once I just, got out of the main core history classes. So yeah, no classically trained chef by any means, but by doing this too is not only learning about the women, but also I'm learning about cooking and all sorts of things in addition to just those historical stories. And I think it's an interesting way that people learn about history in general is through cooking, and everybody likes to eat, so you make some food and learn a little something along the way. But actually really good because the people that were following were really interested in what I was doing. And over the years it's just grown because I've kind of grown with my content and kind of what I was doing and kind of stepping up my game a little bit, rather than just sort of here's a picture of a First Lady and here's me cooking a recipe. So it's been really fun to see how it's grown and the really awesome opportunities that I've had just in the past couple years, from not just the First Ladies Library and those programs, but also different podcasts. And also I presented at History Camp Boston last year, which was the Cooking with the Suffragettes program. So it's really grown, especially just in the past year, especially. I've learned a lot of unique things. I actually was just thinking about it last night, and I already have like 30 pages of research just about the Manhattan Project, Oak Ridge, and the cookbook itself. You never really think about sitting down and reading through a cookbook, but I've literally sat down and read through the Cooking Behind the Fence like it was, just a book, like a fiction or nonfiction style book. And it's just so interesting that these women share these amazing stories. Everything from, the muddy conditions to their experiences cooking. And there's just so many interesting stories. But some of them are super funny too, and also just about the time. And it really puts you in the position of people that were living in the 1940s, not just in the secret city, but also all across the country in regards to rationing. There wasn't a lot of sugar, there wasn't a lot of meat, so they kind of made do with what they had. And some of the really cool stories in the cookbook too are about the community and kind of how much fun they were actually having, which looking in on it from the outside, you wouldn't think any of those situations would be fun. Living with random people, moving from your hometown, being in the mud, living in what were really not probably great houses for most people, especially the hutments that the African Americans lived in. They didn't have windows and it was basically plywood. So, but everybody made do and actually had a really good time, from like tennis court dances to movie theaters and, you know, just having a good time. I'd say you learn about people and their recipes, especially when you look at how they're cooking it, what they're cooking it with, and also when you see what time period that they were cooking it in and their circumstances. So you especially look back, like in regards to first ladies, several of those older first ladies, Martha Washington, all of those ladies, they had enslaved people that were cooking for them. So a lot of the recipes that are attributed to them aren't necessarily theirs. They're usually coming from a different source. And then, you know, just as you move into, you know, the 1920s and, you know, the suffragettes and that sort of thing is sort of also in that whole time period of what people like to eat, and what you had access to. So in, for instance, Cooking Behind the Fence, people made chocolate cake with mayonnaise. There's also one that's like an eggless, wheatless, butterless, milkless cake. Maybe not wheatless, but definitely all those other less. And the woman who was talking about it said that she got that recipe when she was standing in line waiting for a shower. And this lady gave her this recipe, and it was kind of a Great Depression style recipe is what her mother said. So they were just really, you know, these people, through their recipes, you can see what their circumstances were. For more information about these recipes and more, you can find me on Instagram at cookingwiththefirstladies or at my webpage, cookingwiththefirstladies.com, where you can also find a link to my Facebook.